Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to panel 2. We'll just wait another couple of minutes for people to join this breakout room. And if the panelists would like to put your cameras on, please, so we can see you on the panel. Very good. Okay, so I think we'll get started. We've got about 50 participants in the room now. So thank you everybody very much for joining us. We do have a couple more panelists who will be joining us shortly. But first of all, I'll introduce myself. Excuse me. So my name is Deborah Greaves. I'm Professor of Ocean Engineering at the University of Plymouth. I'm very delighted to I've been invited to chair this session, so thank you very much to the Chambers of Commerce for that. So my role at the University of Plymouth is I'm the head of school for the School of Engineering, Computing and Mathematics, and my research area is in offshore renewable energy. So at the moment I'm running a large programme called SuperGen for research in offshore renewable energy, and I'm also director for the Coast Laboratory that we saw in Kevin's slides earlier on this morning, and do a lot of experiments with offshore renewable energy devices. So I'm delighted to be chairing this panel today, and what we want to talk about, following up from that introduction, is how to drive the green and blue economic recovery. So what are the challenges that we have, what are the opportunities, and what are the suggestions that we might want to put forward in this communique from C7. So to start off the debate, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves and just give a little bit on their perspective or their contribution and role within this area. And then we've got some questions that we'll go into the open debate for. And please, can I remind the audience that you're welcome to put in questions into the Q&A function, please, and we'll deal with those as we go through as well. Okay, so thank you very much. If I could ask David to go first, please. So David McCready from Perth, Sydney in Australia. Go ahead.
Well, thank you very much, Deborah, and good evening, as I'll say, but good morning to all of you who are further to the west of where I am. Very simply, my role is I'm the CEO of the Australian British Chamber of Commerce, and we broadly support Australian and British organisations to invest and export and trade between those two countries, but also to other geographies in our local area, particularly across Asia. So what do I do in this area? Well, we've got a very interesting situation in Australia where we have what you would call in the UK devolved administrations. In Australia, we did it the other way around. We had a bunch of British colonies, which we turned into a federation. As we went about that, we assigned some powers to states and some powers to our federal government. The reality is that every state and territory in Australia has made a commitment to be net zero by 2050. Our federal government, our central government, if you will, haven't made that commitment as yet. The closest they've got is, we'd like to be net zero, and 2050 sounds like a good date, but we don't know quite how we're going to get there yet. So once we figure that bit out, we'll make a commitment. So that's where the lay of the land is at the moment here in Australia. The reality is largely in the corporate sector, particularly in a lot of industries that Australia is quite famous for, things like producing coal and iron ore and agriculture, all of which have a significant environmental impact. All of those sorts of organisations that work in those sectors and construction and so forth, almost everyone now is getting to the point where if they haven't made a commitment, they're planning on making a commitment before the end of the year. So whether or not government centrally is going to move that way is somewhat irrelevant, actually, in the bigger scheme of things. So what we've been doing is we've obviously been lobbying the central government just to pull their finger out and get on with it, quite frankly. But also we've been working with a lot of our clients and a lot of our members across the country on helping them to understand how to make that transition, what they need to do, and really being proactive in sharing best practice and experiences between companies that have already made that journey and those who are seeking to do so. So that's really our key role, partly advocacy and partly actually just helping our members get on with the task at hand. I'm conscious that we don't have a lot of time, so I might leave it there.
Okay, thank you very much, David. That's really helpful overview and interesting context from down under. So can we move to Rutendo now? Rutendo, would you like to introduce yourself and say something about your contribution in this area?
Hi, Deborah, and hi, everybody. Very excited to be part of this this panel. So I'm based in Johannesburg, South Africa, and part of the Deloitte Alchemy by Deloitte School of Leadership. And I basically wear two hats, and I'll bring their relevance with regards to the discussion we're having today. One is I'm the business development leader for Africa and emerging markets, and really we take our value proposition to multinationals and multilateral clients, and helping them in their Pan-African strategy. And the other hat that I wear is that I'm the program director for Alchemy by Deloitte School of Leadership, in which we offer customized executive leadership programs. And the reason this is relevant is that at the moment, a big discussion or a big sort of sector that is driving the growth of Africa from an industrialization perspective is the whole issue of energy, primarily from a green economy perspective and to a certain lesser extent from a blue economy perspective. And I work with a lot of clients wanting to invest both locally and multinationals coming into the African space and wanting to invest around infrastructure, around energy, but doing it in a clean way. The irony of it, obviously, is that just to drop some few statistics, is 9 out of the 10 coastal regions in the world, Africa is, I think, countries, 9 out of the 10 leading sort of impacted by climatic change and negative climatic change, 9 out of the 10 are based in Africa. So obviously, it's quite key for us to participate in a discussion like this. But on the other side of the coin, Africa only contributes 1% of the global carbon footprint. So that's actually an interesting point to bring into relevance. But looking forward to this discussion and bringing input with regards to what we're seeing on the content, how that taps into the bigger role, and obviously what's happening with G7. That's more or less from my side. Deborah, back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Rutendo. And let's move to Brussels now, to Ben Butters in Brussels. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Great to be here. So my name is Ben Butters. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Eurochambers, which is the European Association of Chambers of Commerce and Industry. Most of our members are EU national chamber associations. We also have a number of non-EU European national chambers among our members. And yeah, our focus in relation to the climate change agenda revolves heavily around the EU Green Deal, which is a very ambitious package of recommendations and targets, which they're now rolling out in the form of legislative proposals to respond to climate change. And we're very conscious that that has to be part of a broader global solution, bearing in mind that the EU population only constitutes about 7% of the global population, and EU GDP is only about 15% of the share of global GDP. So we have to be part of an international, globally coordinated response to climate change. I'm very happy to be here. I have family in the Southwest, so it's great to be involved, and thanks to the Chambers of the Southwest and the other partners for organising this, and look forward to the discussion.
Okay, thank you very much, Ben. Thanks for joining us. And Nina, would you like to go next?
Hi, everybody. I'm really pleased as well to be here. Obviously, it would be lovely for us all to be in the Southwest, but I think the joy of us all being able to do this on Zoom is that we've been able to have so many participants and speakers from right around the globe. And I think that's something that might not have been possible pre-pandemic, but that certainly is the way that I hope that we'll all continue to work in this as we go towards this net zero world. So I'm from Business West, and we're the Chamber of Commerce. We're part of the Southwest Chambers Network, and we're one of the larger chambers of commerces in the country. I'm the head of sort of climate strategy there. And as a chamber, we've been sort of working on the environmental issues and climate change for quite a while. We've had an ISO 14001 system where we've been working to reduce our own emissions, and we really try to set out to lead by example. So we recently became a B Corp, and last year we issued a statement on the climate emergency. And off the back of that, we've committed to become net zero ourselves by 2030, but also to work with our members and the wider business community then to reduce their own carbon emissions, and also to work right across the region so that we can unlock all of the changes and the infrastructure changes that will be needed to drive that to net zero economy. For me, I guess, you know, my perspective on the blue-green economy, it's all-encompassing. I think it's really important to think about the just transition in order to achieve the net zero vision. But it's recognizing that I think every single sector, every business is going to be part of it. This is not something that's simply just part of sort of innovative companies and tech companies. And I think that presentation that we saw earlier with Kevin, which shows sort of how the agricultural sector in the Southwest is adapting so that it's no longer a carbon emitter, it's got the potential then to be a carbon sink. And I think that's the sort of thinking that we're going to be seeing more and more over the next few years, and seeing sort of sectors really changing and sort of aligning their priorities and their ways that they work on that net zero agenda.
Okay, thank you very much, Nina. And Stuart, would you like to go next?
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, everyone, and welcome to the conference. My name is Stuart Telford. I'm the Chief Executive of Devon and Plymouth Chamber of Commerce and Chair of British Chambers of Commerce Southwest, which is hosting this conference. Thank you, Deborah, for joining us, and to our headline sponsor, University of Plymouth, and to all the panelists who've joined us from around the world. And I echo Nina's points. Isn't it lovely that we can do this? And let's take some of the positives that have come out of the pandemic, that we are able to communicate face to face, even though we're not in the same room. So that's wonderful. From my point of view, obviously, I think the Southwest has incredible natural assets and is a wonderful place to work and do business. As well as live, of course. And my colleagues around the country are very jealous when we finish a national call and I say, I'm off on my kayak, I'll be on the water in 10 minutes on the beach. David's laughing because he's in Sydney and we'll be thinking, yeah, but I'll be hot. So I think it's absolutely a fantastic part of the world to do business, and we've got to capitalise on those natural assets, but in a way, as other speakers in both the main session and here have alluded to, that doesn't negatively impact our world. As Chambers of Commerce, I think Nina's absolutely right. We have to be exemplar organisations, and I have written down about B Corp and net zero because I'll be honest, completely frank, in the midst of Brexit and pandemic, it has not been top of the agenda, but I think I need to move it up the agenda so that we do that and show leadership. But I also think we need to help our members do it. There's no good preaching from on high. There's no good saying thou shalt or thou shalt not. What we have to do is help our members take a series of steps towards achieving this. Even if they're baby steps, what do they say? Every long journey starts with a single step. We've just got to start. And anything we can do to do that, especially working collaboratively with our partners from around the world, then that's definitely the way forward. I won't say what my call of government and G7 will be, because I think that'll come out later, but I think we definitely can't do it alone. And I'm so grateful to you all for joining and helping us take this first step together.
Okay, thank you very much, Stuart. And yeah, absolutely echo those sentiments around how valuable it is to be able to get everybody together, even if we can't be in the same room. There are some real benefits we've learned over the last year, so this is great. So our next panelist is Frank Eich, who's from the British Chamber of Commerce, Germany. I think
yes, good morning. I'm very happy to be here as well, and all welcome from around the world, including up to Australia, it seems. I'm based in London, but I represent today the British Chamber of Commerce of Germany. I'm a member, and we recently started a sustainability working group where we're trying to bring together the real economy, but also the financial markets, because some of our members are banks and financial businesses in the financial sector. And for us, it will be very important to bring together the capital markets and the private businesses in the real economy. So Mark Satterwell's comments regarding ESG, what is the role of capital markets is important to us. And obviously, we also see the importance of the collaboration between the public and the private sector. And I want to add here the capital markets. Representing here now British Chamber of Commerce in Germany. In Germany, there are particular challenges. About 10 years ago, we started the Energiewende, this pivoting of energy, which mainly was about exiting nuclear power. And there's still obviously very, very slow progress. We moved into renewables. In Germany, there's a particular challenge that most of the generation of renewables takes place in the windy north, but the power-hungry energy users, the businesses are actually in the south. So one of the major problems has been that Germany has been able to generate a lot of new renewable power, but it's actually not getting to the consumers. And that is a question of planning systems and getting the licenses. And all the people living between the north and the south, everyone in the middle is against these high energy transmission lines and grids and all that. So in Germany, I think the issue of grids getting power to the people where it actually ought to be is one of the major problems. Germany also has a general election in September, and the Green Party is in the running to maybe have the next chancellor to actually lead the next government. We don't know. I mean, obviously, we take whatever happens. And for the first time, they think they have a chance of getting into power. And I think opinion polls and surveys show that they are close. At least there would be a very senior junior partner in the next coalition government. So energy and environmental policy will be top of the agenda in Germany over the next few years. It has become a major policy issue over the last few weeks. You might have seen that, which I think was a first. The Constitutional Court in Germany overruled the government, saying that its climate change ambitions, which had been legislated for, were not ambitious enough, and told the government to actually come up with better plans. So the government had only clear targets up to 2030, also had net zero ambitions to up to 2050, but actually hadn't specified that. That was challenged by apparently a lot of younger people saying you're taking away our human rights by putting all the pressure on us in the future. And the Constitutional Court ruled that the German government had to actually be much more precise. And as a result, the targets were moved, I think, from 2040 to 2035. They became much tougher over the last few weeks. Now, we'll end on that. What I think is crucial is that businesses and also consumers have some kind of predictability, some flight path where they know what is required up to when. So what policymakers shouldn't do is jump around all the time and send, in the worst case, conflicting signals.
Yeah, I think the question around targets and commitments is a really important one, and also scenario planning. Anyway, thank you very much, Frank. And we're also joined by Michael de Fabiana, who's also joined us today from the Franco-British Chamber. So thank you very much, Michael. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for inviting me. So I'm based in Paris, Vice President of the Franco-British Chamber of Commerce. And in my past executive jobs, I dealt with energy, steel, chemicals activities. So you can imagine that I am in the heart of this ESG debate. Of course, our members are mostly, our main large members, apart from the financial sector, are in chemicals, transport, aviation, nuclear, and pharmaceuticals and health. So it's all about ESG. In France, we have set targets, which are very strong targets for 2030. We have launched an investment plan of 30 billion, which is called Green Investment Plan. And we have legislation which impose climate and resilience considerations at board level. So we are in the middle of the ESG and certainly at the heart, I would say, of the ESG debate. And we help our members to keep competitive and look at opportunities offered by the ESG and especially the climate transition. So we also insist on transition rather than ordering or banning or punishing, sanctioning. We think allowing transition and supporting transition measures is important. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you to everybody for your opening statements there. I think that's really interesting. Covers a lot of ground and things that we can pick up on as well. So I think one of those is around what's been said around sort of commitments made either by local or central government, commitments made by businesses, and statements around or targets around net zero, and the difficulty around that in terms of also providing a pathway to get there. So I wonder if we could sort of follow up on that with your thoughts on, you know, what's the behavior change that we need, and how does that within businesses, and how does that link to the benefit of setting targets, and how does that help us to sort of frame the behavior change that's needed. So I'm going to go to David first, I think, if that's okay. I won't necessarily go in order, so if someone would like to...
Just keep picking on me, it's okay, Deborah, it's all right.
Sorry.
Look, I think in terms of behaviour changes, I think it's really important. It's why we're advocating for our federal government to take a more progressive stance than what they are. Yeah, it was interesting listening to others. I think one of the really interesting opportunities for British organisations in Australia is you've had such a strong history of offshore wind, of a variety of technologies, and you know, you only have to look at geothermal, all the various things that you guys are doing over there. We have a continent here in Australia to do stuff with. We have space beyond belief. You know, the size of the state of Victoria is about the same as the size of the entire United Kingdom. So when you put that, in fact, the former High Commissioner Alexander Downer's favourite comment was the UK, investors from the UK own more agricultural land in Australia than there is land in the UK. So it gives you an idea of how vast a footprint we have in Australia. We are very, very densely, actually, in some respects, populated. About 5.5, 6 million people in Sydney, about 5 million in Melbourne, out of 25 million in total. And in fact, when you look at us, The Economist about 10 years ago described us as 6 islands in a continent of landmass that didn't make any sense at all. You know, the city's very well populated, very sparsely populated more regionally. So the opportunities for investment in Australia, and we've seen the likes of Octopus investment as just to name one, but there are, you know, BP are putting in a massive solar farm at the moment. Shell are working in this space in this country. There are lots of UK investors that are seeing the opportunity in Australia, not only around the opportunity for what's currently available, if you like, in terms of solar and wind and other renewable energy forms, but really looking at you know, some of it's a transition from higher carbon to lower carbon. So looking to move away from our traditional coal. About 80% of Australia's power still comes from coal. We have no nuclear in Australia, despite the fact we have the second largest source of uranium in the world. We don't have any nuclear. We don't want it in our backyard. We're still frightened by Chernobyl and Long Island and other issues that have happened around the world many years ago. And it's a very difficult and vexed challenge in Australia to have that nuclear conversation. But we have plenty. We have oodles of space to put in solar farms, to put in wind farms. We have not the high ups that that other places have for hydro, but we do have some hydro in Australia. We have the opportunity for pumped hydro at our dam sites. There are lots of opportunities for investment in Australia, and I think part of the challenge for us is changing our rhetoric from what politically has been a poisonous and toxic conversation in Australia for the last more than a decade. One of my great challenges as an Australian going to the UK is you turn up and people say, "Oh, who's your prime minister this week?" Because you seem to have had a revolving door of them over the last decade. When you look at it, going back, leaving John Howard aside, from then, Kevin Rudd, Julia Gillard, Tony Abbott, Malcolm Turnbull have all lost their jobs, and Kevin Rudd had 2 runs in that period as well. They've all lost their jobs because of climate-related issues in Australia. So it's a really vexed political issue at the central government level. But there are huge things that are already happening, as I alluded to earlier, not only in my initial comments, but here. There are lots of things that we can do, lots of opportunities for investment. Wave, tidal, there's basically, you name it, we've got everything. And to the point made earlier as well about critical minerals, we don't have the world's biggest set of these things, but like everything else, Australia seems to have a reasonable proportion of just about everything when it comes to mineral wealth as well. So there's huge opportunities here for investment, but also partnership. And one of the things, the current FTA negotiations that we're doing with the UK in the side agreements that we're looking to push forward is opportunities to share, collaborate and work together with UK universities, with other research institutes and industry to commercialise those assets in a way that's available to the free world, as you might put it.
Thank you very much. And I think certainly in my area, I'm aware of some very exciting wave energy innovations coming out of Australia as well, which is great.
We do that too. We have some R&D here that we would love to share with the world as well.
Yes, no, we collaborate. It's great. Now, Nina, I know wanted to tackle this question as well. So we were talking about behaviour change and what's needed, behaviour change for businesses, particularly when we've got commitments made and targets set out. How do we need to help businesses to change behaviours? Go ahead, Nina.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think, echoing what David said, is collaboration is a huge thing. So, what we've been able to do here, particularly in Bristol, like building on our sort of legacy of being a European green capital, is that we've been able to create partnerships and we've been able to create sort of forums that bring some of the corporate businesses together, members with some of the SMEs, so that they can share expertise and sort of share what best practice looks like and also what some of the common challenges are. But for us, the Chamber, what we've done is just to try to understand where companies are on that spectrum of net zero so that we can best support them. We know that we've got some right at the sort of vanguard and sort of innovating and developing, but we know, that there might be some that are further behind. We're currently undertaking a survey of our members, and what's kind of interesting from that first week of results that's come back is that 70% of our members and respondents are saying that they are doing something on climate action, and of that 70%, 50% are planning to invest in climate action in the next 12 months. So it just shows that there are ways of doing it. What we tend to find as well is that now that companies tend to know, we all know that we all need to get to net zero, be that by 2030, 2050. But it's that recognition that there are going to be many different routes and many for companies and sectors to go on that journey. And I think, as chambers, it's important that we are able to sort of share that expertise, recognising not all companies are going to have the skills or the resources available to look at all the different ways of doing that. So, we've sort of set up partnerships with sort of EV campaigns, looking about, we've got a clean air zone that's coming in our region, looking at how do we support companies to make those sorts of transitions. But also, we've got an innovation team that's looking to help that grow that EGS sector. We've got an international team that's looking to help those EGS sort of companies as well. How do they export? So it's, you know, for me, that behavior change, it's just, I think it's having that penny drop, realizing that this is every sector and every business's challenge, and the scale of the challenge, and the idea of being quite open-minded about how you go about facing that climate action. It might be some incremental changes. It might be totally changing your business model. I think yesterday we found out there's a peat mining company in Ireland and now changing their model to become a peat restoration and a carbon sink. So it's, and the news in you know, about what's happening with the energy companies. So I think there's going to be lots of small changes, but I think we're going to start seeing some really big changes as well.
Okay, thank you, Nina. Frank, can we come to you now, because I think you were going to say something about the incentives.
Yes, I mean, I've seen here some of the comments regarding what incentives do businesses need, and especially also smaller ones. I mean, I think there's a recognition now that climate change is really here to stay. I think until a few years ago, it was considered, there was still a debate, is it really happening? And I think there's no recognition, no, it really is happening. So I think across all sectors of the economy, including consumers, there needs to be massive behavioral changes. It cannot only be about higher taxes to force people to change, but it's also about incentives to make people want to change. And I mean, I have a particular interest in the capital markets, and I mentioned banks earlier on, and institutional investors and ESG investments. And there has been a tipping point in that industry over the last 2-3 years. And as far as I understand, and I'm particularly interested in pension funds in the UK, DB pension funds, and they're some of the biggest institutional investors. And you cannot have a debate about investment anymore without ESG being mentioned. It's no longer, it's here about the stakeholders. It's no longer possible to invest in a business when they don't meet these ESG targets. So it's not only about environment, it's social, about governance. And then there's a lot of stuff happening. And then the businesses that commit themselves to meeting some agreed targets on doing something about the environment, and they might get actually better funding costs. Yeah, so I was told that in banks you do a loan, and then after 5 years or whatever, after 3 years you meet again, and then you say, did you make that investment to meet your targets? Yes, I did, and then your funding costs go down. So I mean, this is obviously often it's about money incentives, but that is something that actually is a positive incentive. It's not like a negative incentive. And I think we will see that increasingly used by the capital markets to drive that agenda, this green finance agenda. I think will make quite a big impact on how the real economy will develop and can develop.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Thank you, Frank. So I want us to move us on to the next question, really, which is and trying to pick up on some of the questions in the chat as well. I think all of the panelists can see those, so we can sort of bring some answers to those into our comments. But I think, so we've talked a bit about the setting of targets, incentives, and the behaviour change needed, and how we can collaborate and build forward together in order to achieve that. What are the real challenges that businesses face, and how can we sort of focus on those? Stuart, can I go to you for this first of all?
Yes, thank you, Deborah. And I'm glad. I think this is the fundamental problem: is businesses want to do the right thing, but partly, as Nina's alluded to, they don't know how to, and I think we need to help them do that. But they also need to remain competitive, and this is where we need to work together. It's very hard to remain competitive if being sustainable is more expensive, if you're reducing your impact on the environment is harder and more expensive. If you think about the businesses, especially at the moment, recovering from pandemic, and in the UK recovering from Brexit, which has been a real impact for businesses, to then add additional costs and resource implications is difficult. So I think collaboratively, we need to work with our like-minded partners and help each other reduce our costs. So we can't do it on our own in a single country. So the challenge is about, as has been alluded to in the questions there, about changing consumer behavior. And as I said in the chat, I think consumers do want things that are sustainable. They want to invest in companies that are doing good. They want to work for companies that have a purpose and are socially responsible, but they're also incredibly fickle about price. You know, is there anyone on the call who can honestly say they've never gone on Amazon and bought the cheapest thing and found that it came from China? And they didn't even know it came from China. And I'm not picking on China. I'm just saying, you know, that is a particularly difficult problem about how we let the consumer, the end user, know the environmental impacts of what's happened to that product or service as it comes to you. You know, if you get food, you get a traffic light system. I don't know if you have this around the world, forgive me, but in the UK, you can see whether the fat levels are red, amber or green. Clearly, I don't read that enough. But in environmental sense, should we have the same? Should consumers know the impact of what they're buying on the environment? So I think it's partly consumer driven, but government and the private sector have to work together on this, not just stick, but also carrot and incentive.
Okay. Thank you very much, Stuart. And I think absolutely right, thinking about consumer behavior and how we can help provide the information that people need in order to make those choices is really important. I'm going to go to Mikhail now, and then after that to Ben, because I think you've both got contributions in this question.
Well, I think the main challenge is to set up a transition period, because it is very clear that all these goals and targets will not be obtained easily. So you need to review the impact of your activities, address how do you mitigate or compensate the impact, and what are your transition steps, and they must be clearly expressed to the market, to your investors, to your customers, and to the authorities. If you take an example of energy, France is typical for having a strong nuclear energy percentage, and nuclear, this was mentioned earlier by our Australian colleague, but nuclear has a good side, no carbon, but it has still a bad image in the green parties. So you need to balance. And it is very clear that France is at the heart of what I call the electricity grid in Europe, linking with UK, North Europe, Germany, South Europe. And we are able to balance and to be the heart of the system thanks to our nuclear energy, which is not depending on any wind, solar, sun, or resource activity. So it's a very important point, because for the nuclear industry and the renewables which come along, this will be the heart of our electricity system in future. For instance, we have decided to abandon coal activities as soon as 2022. So it's very important to have plans which review, correct your strategy, and at the same time propose a new strategy, new activities. If you look at our industry, Total, EDF, Renault, Peugeot, Alstom, Carrefour, chemicals activities, these are European leaders, and they need to remain competitive, and at the same time they need to agree and accept transitions in all of their activities. So I think this is really the challenge for all of us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mikhail. I think that's a really good point. The transition, we need to plot our course, but we can't jump straight to where we need to get to by 2050. So we need to help people through the stages of that transition. Okay, let's go to Ben now. Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, thanks, Deborah. I think it perhaps is a little bit trite to say this, but being in business, I guess, is all about responding to challenges, to tackling those challenges, and we've seen that very clearly in the last year or so. But what we've also seen in the last year or so is that policymakers need to help businesses respond to those challenges. They need to provide the support, the framework whereby they can absorb unforeseeable problems and respond to challenges positively and still be in a position to survive and hopefully to recover and grow again. And I think, as Michelle just highlighted, we need a transition process. This can't be a kind of shock therapy. Otherwise, that's going to have a lot of casualties. And we need financing for that transition to help with the research and innovation, to help businesses to invest in climate protection and that energy transition. My last point at this stage, Deborah, would be that we also need a balance between regulatory obligations and economic incentives. We got an example in the EU at the moment of a new legislative proposal that is being worked on about due diligence in global supply chains. A lot of businesses, even very small businesses, are involved in extremely complex supply chains, sometimes without knowing it necessarily. And the European Commission is working on a new directive whereby businesses would have much greater responsibility to understand and control what is going on in their supply chain in relation to environmental impact, but also human rights and other factors, all of which are very important. But we need to remember that small businesses in particular don't have either the intelligence, not the mental intelligence, but the information intelligence or the leverage to affect those global supply chains. And we can't unduly punish them or restrict their ability to be part of those supply chains unless it's done in a very careful manner and that the specific needs and conditions of smaller businesses in particular are taken into account. So we need to get that balance right. Otherwise, this is going to be another cliff edge, a term we heard a lot in Brexit context a year or two ago. We're going to have a kind of energy transition cliff edge if we don't do this in an incremental and well-planned manner.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'd like to pick up on a couple of questions that have come into the chat now, and perhaps go to Rutendo and then to David on this. I think one thing that's coming out is the sort of the tension of COVID and climate change targets and needs. So on the one hand, what have we learned from the COVID experience that we can bring into our response to climate change and to delivering net zero? And on the other hand, is there a tension between the two? I think we heard a comment that the need to have dealt with the emergency of COVID had maybe put other things off a little bit. So how do those things balance? So Rutendo, over to you first.
Yeah, thanks, Deborah. And I think it's quite a relevant question. I think the challenge that you have right now is that obviously with the imminence of COVID or with the impact of COVID, I think there's an old saying, I think it was Mike Tyson, who said everybody has got a plan until they get punched in the face. And I think that's what happened with COVID, is that, around climate change, around net zero effects, around in terms of aligning to that and the expectations from a global accountability perspective, there are all these plans and processes in place, and then COVID hit us and knocked us on the ground. So definitely, and looking at the multinationals, multilateral clients I deal with from an Africa perspective, the priority is obviously shifted to, okay, what can we do from a health infrastructure perspective? What can we do from a people perspective in terms of fighting COVID? It's not, climate change is not totally off the cards, but definitely there's been an impact. And I think as we see the vaccination coming into play, somebody mentioned, I think it was either Stuart or Ben, with regards to the impact on the supply chain. And from an Africa perspective, what you've seen now is people are saying, gosh, we've got a problem, and today it might be COVID, tomorrow it will be climate change. But with regards to industrialization, how much dependent are we on our supply chain with regards to solving our problems to a China, which is a big impact from an Africa perspective. So there's a lot of sort of inward searching and saying, okay, how can we do this better but do it ourselves? So I think from that perspective, we're looking at climate change compared to the impact of COVID. There's been that kind of thinking that's going there. I think just to reflect on another point today is that, and again, I'm just referring to from an Africa perspective, Deborah, but I think it applies to emerging markets as well. We've got a population of 1.2 billion. Of that 1.2 billion, 600 million people don't have access to electricity. And the ones that have access to electricity, a large portion of that electricity is based on coal-based fuel as a source of energy. So obviously, from a climate change perspective, there's a lot of big opportunity to bring sustainable energy solutions that align to a green economy from an Africa perspective. I was speaking to another multinational company from Switzerland that wants to invest big time on the continent, and they want to bring nuclear, which is great because it's a lot of power, but it's a lot of money. But is this sustainable in this environment? Not at all. So I'm just bringing a lot of elements in terms of when you talk about climate change, there's the theoretical part with regards to what it brings and the impact it provides. But also then there's the practicality with regards to what is really sustainable and what's smoke and mirrors. So I know I'm throwing a number of things there, but I think I'm just trying to bring a perspective in terms of what we're seeing on the continent with regards to this, and obviously open up opportunities from companies in the UK coming to invest on the continent. So let me pause there, but hopefully I've addressed some key touch points.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thanks, Rutendo. And I think that idea that not all solutions work everywhere and need to be adapted to the local area is very important. Now we've had so much to talk about today, and there's been lots of questions coming in, and everyone's got really valuable contributions here. But I'm mindful of time, so I'd like us to in the next session just try to add to what you want from what we've already had, but also see if you can bring forward some top tips or key asks that you think need to be in this communication into G7, please. So I'm going to go to David again, and if you could just finish what you want to say with those top tips, that would be really helpful. Thank you, David.
Look, I'm really conscious of time, but I really love Rutendo being able to quote Mike Tyson. I'm not sure he's one of the key people, but I want to exchange email addresses so that we can talk more about Mike Tyson's quotes. I've got some crackers from him. Look, I think one of the things that I'm hearing from everybody on the call today and really would like to see taken forward is we all have this challenge. And for us in Australia, it's a particular sort of political challenge rather than a real challenge. We've got investor groups here. I think Stuart was making the point earlier where investors want to see green outcomes. We're talking about the triple bottom line. It's not just about the old dynamic. We're talking about a new dynamic where that environmental, social responsibility and governance structures need to be right and need to be able to take things forward. We need governments at the top level to support that. And I'm first to put my hand up and say Australia's probably not doing enough in that space. But I think it's great that we lean into that. I think that the challenge that we've all spoken about is we all have different elements that don't necessarily play to our best strength. In the UK, we always giggle in Australia that the UK destroyed its own coal industry 30 odd years ago when Margaret Thatcher decided that coal mining wasn't a great idea for the UK anymore for very different reasons than what we're talking about now. And we've still been digging it out of the ground like there's no tomorrow. And well, to a certain degree, if we keep digging it out like that, there won't be a tomorrow. So we really do see the real importance of activist shareholders, big pension funds, big investors being able to say, you know what, we recognise that we need to make a transition. So we don't want to leave assets stranded, but we need to recognise that when they come to the end of their natural life, for example, there's lots of coal-fired power stations in Australia which will come to the end of their natural life before 2050. If we're not replacing them with coal, if we're looking for other opportunities, we really do have a way on a large scale to change that conversation. And we do have a way that we can continue to push these newer technologies than coal. I mean, it was a long time ago that the UK started coal-fired power stations, well before we did in Australia. we haven't moved off it yet, but there are lots of technologies that can replace that. And we all need to combine together to do that. I think the other point that I take away, and I think Stuart echoed partly a comment that I've maybe made about what we actually do, is we need to help businesses to recognise the steps they can take. We need to be able to say, hey, we recognise not every board and not every member of your organisation might be 100% committed to this, but we can make an economic argument which is strong enough to support that. We do need to make a change, because in the long term, this is going to be better for us. And if we can do those couple of things, I think we'll be a long way down the road.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. Okay, so we really need to have some short and concise top tips now from everybody. I'm just going to go around everybody. So Stuart, do you want to go next?
Thanks, Deborah. Yeah, we've got less than a minute each, so we better keep it really quick. So my top asks are of government and countries is to use the carrot and stick with them all. Show leadership, even if it means going out on your own. Work with like-minded partners, but be strong with those that are not complying around the world. And finally, you saw it here first, use Stuart Telford's traffic light system for products and systems. I will copyright it and be a millionaire by this time next week. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Stuart. Okay, Nina, let's go to you.
So my top tip is it's for each of the G7 countries to make sure that they're helping those businesses to realise how to go back getting to net zero, and making sure that we've got this just transition support, giving them support, helping them to access finance, and helping them to overcome some of those additional barriers, particularly now that we're coming out or still within a pandemic. On the G7 front, it's recognising that we need to look at our carbon footprint, but beyond our borders, so making sure that the Scope 3 is part of the conversation. So we can act as leaders, but carbon doesn't recognise any borders. We need to make sure that we can bring the whole world with us on this journey.
Okay, that's very good. Thanks, Nina. Rutendo, can you come to you?
I think, obviously, from a G7 perspective, the great opportunity at the end of the day is that most of the raw materials that contribute to a green economy, large extent of them are here in Africa. If we can streamline that supply chain so that it's a win-win for both regions, both the consumers, the manufacturers, contributing industrialization, et cetera, it's great. So I'll cap off with this carrot and stick. I don't know who was the clever chap who said it, but very relevant, and I'll tap onto that. Carrot and stick, it always works, especially when you're trying to help policy and investment.
Great, thank you very much, Rutendo. Ben.
Thanks, Deborah. First point would be to ensure access to affordable energy. Sounds obvious, but it's crucial, and that means ramping up renewable energy production. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, a balanced approach between regulatory obligations and economic incentives. A coordinated approach as well between international economies, both in terms of regulations and approaches. Otherwise, we won't have a level playing field, and that will undermine the whole process. And finally, make sure that enough financing is available for the transition, particularly for smaller businesses.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to Frank next, and then Mikhail.
Yes, thank you. I mean, I agree with all the points made. This carrot and stick is absolutely crucial. Collaboration is crucial. I think there's an absolute role for government, public sector to take the lead. I mean, as people here said, colleagues said, countries, G7 countries need to take leadership and need to work closely with businesses. And it's about this flight path. And also about this being punched in the face. Once you get up again, you should return to your previous plans. You should revisit them and say, has the world changed? But I think climate hasn't really changed. So as quickly as possible, one should return to that. And I think that's the biggest worry I have. If the recovery from the pandemic isn't as quick as we hope it will be, that people say, oh, we don't have the luxury to look at climate. And I don't think that's wrong nowadays.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Frank. And Mikhail.
Well, first, we should be reminded that business will make, but not alone. So we need government, legislators, regulators to encourage, to support, to incentivize research, investment, transition, renewables, etc. And we need a cooperation between countries, certainly within Europe, but also between continents, and Europe and Africa, for instance, is the most obvious one.
Okay. Have we got back onto time? That was a real quick whiz round. So thank you very much, everybody, and thank you for being so sort of precise in that final summing up. I think that was really helpful. I think we're going to be delivered back to the main session. So in the chat, you'll see there's a link back to the main session. So I would invite everyone to go back there, and we will see you in a minute on the other side. Thank you very much to everybody for all of your questions and for all of your answers and your discussion. It was a really interesting session.
Thank you, Deborah. Well chaired. Brilliant.
Thank you.
I absolutely agree with you, Stuart. Well chaired, Deborah. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done, Deborah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Right.